Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today. As Megan mentioned, I am Brittney Rogers, the Aquatic Restoration and Resiliency Coordinator with the SLELO PRISM. Robert and I are going to give a quick introduction to the Black River Trail, SLELO PRISM, and talk about the methodology that we use to conduct this feasibility study. And then also go deeper into the recommendations that we provided to the parks and also to the public as a whole to kind of think forward about what kind of work can happen at the Black River Trail. And so Robert and I are kind of flopping back and forth with our presentation. So if you have any questions for one of us specifically, please put those in the chat, and then we will talk to everybody at the end for the full discussion. We're going to take our videos off throughout the presentation just to try to ensure that nobody runs into too many technological issues today. So thanks again for joining. In 2020 and 2021, we worked together to initiate this Black River Trail feasibility study to assess the invasive species suppression potential and then also ecological restoration. We are with the SLELO PRISM. If you're not familiar, our mission is to protect native biodiversity and freshwater resources through a collaborative approach to invasive species management. We have multiple partners that we work closely with around the region. I know many of you on the line are partners that we've worked with in the past, and we are one of 8 PRISMs across New York State, and we primarily work in the 5-county region across the St. Lawrence, Lewis, Oswego, Jefferson, and Oneida counties, which you can see on the map here. We have a variety of programming and initiatives that we focus on, including surrounding invasive species, the prevention of them, early detection, rapid response, management and control, ecological restoration, and of course, education and outreach, which is what brought us all here together today. Some of our special initiatives that we've been working on in the past year or two include a macrophyte nutrient analysis on water chestnut and the impacts to the water bodies they're growing in, an aquatic restoration initiative that is happening in tributaries to Eastern Lake Ontario. And there's a webinar coming up next month about that if you're interested. The Black River Trail study, which we're talking about today, environmental DNA monitoring, pollinator pathway, spotted lanternfly spotters program, the Tug Hill Forest Restoration, the Urban Forest Sustainability Initiative, and our Watercraft Inspection Steward program co-administered with the Thousand Islands Land Trust. We do strategically focus our work on the tiered species list. So we've worked with partners at the New York Natural Heritage Program and the IMAP invasives team who helped us prioritize and kind of sort through the invasives world. Unfortunately, there's a lot of invasives out there, and this helps us really focus in our attention on the species that have the highest impact potential to different parts of our community. If you're interested in learning more about this, you can visit our website at sleloinvasives.org. So just to give a brief introduction to the Black River Trail, I'm sure there's others on the line that might have been able to do a much more thorough job talking about the Black River Trail, but we specifically studied this 3.5-mile segment along the Black River riparian area, and we, as in myself and the terrestrial coordinator, Robert, who you'll hear from soon. And we basically, if you're not familiar with this trail, it connects the city of Watertown to the village of Black River, and it goes along basically right directly along the Black River. So it's a pretty interesting trail that isn't in a riparian corridor. It's paved and it's a very high use area. The state parks estimated over 100,000 visitors in 2019. So it's a very high use trail year round. There are and there were several known invasive plant species on this trail or and along this trail, but little was really known about the distribution and what their impacts actually were. As you can imagine, riparian areas are an extremely important component of healthy watersheds and ecological function. So by acting as these buffers between the upland areas and open water, the vegetation that grows there helps to filter nutrients and sediment from sources that are upland. They protect water quality, reducing erosion, and also just maintaining biological diversity providing shade and monitoring streamside temperatures, and a lot more effects that riparian areas have on both water bodies and connected lands. So overall, river health is connected to these riparian areas, and it makes them really important. And so, as you can imagine, invasive species can really have a significant impact on this ecology. If you're not super familiar with the Black River, it is a river system that begins in the foothills of the Adirondack Mountains, the western area, and flows approximately 125 miles before terminating in Eastern Lake Ontario. So connecting two really important vital resources in our region. The main objectives of this study were to look at the native and invasive species along the trail, determine the feasibility of invasive species management and suppression and future restoration work, and then provide the results and recommendations from this study to the State Parks Program, and then also other partners to take this information, and hopefully we can together work forward and acquire future funding. The project team, majority of the on-the-ground work occurred from Robert and myself. However, I do need to emphasize that Zach Simek's help was really important and vital to this part of the program as well. He assisted with the creation of the survey tools that we used, and also in the reporting process and data analysis. So I don't know if Zach's on the line, but thanks to Zach for being a part of this as well. And I'm going to swap over to Robert.
All right, hello everyone. As it's already been mentioned, my name is Robert. I'm the Terrestrial Restoration Resiliency Coordinator for SLELO PRISM. During the summer of 2020, we divided the Black River Trail into 29 compartments. The length of each compartment was 1/8 of a mile, and the width of each compartment went from the river to the north to 100 feet from the trail to the south. So the size of the compartments did vary a bit according to the distance of the trail to the river for each compartment. Data concerning the types and quantities of natives, non-natives, and invasive species, as well as the location of natural and man-made features such as tributaries and culverts, were collected for each compartment using Survey 123. Oh, there it goes. Got it. All right, from the end of 2020 into 2021, we analyzed the data that we had collected. This analysis included compiling and comparing the quantities of the natives, non-natives, invasives, and rare plant species in each compartment. Comparing the invasive species management strategies, and considering the slopes at each compartment and whether the areas were wetland or upland. So, moisture levels. The analysis of the data included a system that we created for prioritizing each compartment for management and restoration. My next slides will walk you through this system. The first step that we used to prioritize the compartments involved using the Floristic Quality Index, or FQI, which is a common index used to determine the quality of a plant community. It is computed by multiplying the mean coefficient of conservatism score, which is the C with the line over it you see on the slide, by the square root of the number of species, or N, present in each compartment. The coefficient of conservatism is a numerical value assigned to each plant species. The value of the coefficient of conservatism will range from 0, which applies to species with a wide range of tolerances and little restrictions, to 10, which applies to a species with a very narrow range of tolerances. We use the New York Flora Atlas to assign New York specific C values to all species identified during the field survey. Each compartment was then placed into one of 3 FQI quality categories by their index score. So those compartments with an FQI score of 1 to 19 were placed in the low quality category. Scores from 20 to 35 were placed in the high quality category, and those scores over 35 were placed in the natural areas or exceptional category. At this point, we decided that those compartments categorized as natural areas would be our highest priority for protection and control work, while those categorized as low would be excluded or placed at the very bottom of our priority list. Those compartments rated as high were very similar to or the same in score, and so they required an additional method to determine where they should be on our priority list. What we came up with, we called a summary score. This score is a weighted sum of native species, of a native species score and an invasive species score. The native species score is weighted at 20%, and the invasive species score is weighted at 80%. This gave us some further weight to the quality of the site, but what it really did was emphasize where invasive species control is of greatest need. As you can see on the slide, the native score is a weighted sum of the rank or quantile of each compartment's FQI score and the rank or quantile of the compartment's number of exploitably vulnerable species, which was the highest rarity level found on the Black River Trail. The lowest score, or the compartment with the lowest score would have the highest, is the one with the highest quality of native species. So the lower the score, the higher the quality of native species. The invasive species score is a weighted sum of the rank or quantile of each compartment's abundance of tiered invasive species. And those are the tiered invasive species are those which SLELO PRISM typically manages. And it's also the rank or quantile of each compartment's abundance of non-tiered invasive species, or those species that we don't typically manage for. This score is weighted heavily towards the tiered species since they are most likely to be managed, for this project. The lowest score is the compartment with the greatest quantity of invasive species of concern. All right, before I show you the resulting prioritization score, I'd like to point out that this is a flexible method that will take spatial relationships into account. As an example, the top bar you see on the slide shows 5 high priority compartments before spatial analysis. Those are 11, 13, 14, 15, and 20. 4 of these compartments are close to each other. That's 11, 13, 14, and 15. And if you note, they have a non-prioritized compartment, number 12, in the middle of them. And the 5th prioritized compartment is way over to the right, number 20, all by itself. On the lower bar, you can see that the changes that we could make after the spatial analysis. So instead of managing for the 5 priority compartments that we have on the first bar, we may decide to treat the compartments in the or the compartment in the middle of the group instead of the one by itself. So we might not do 20, we might instead do 12. And this would ensure continuity of control in that area, since it's all one, it'd make it all one big group. And it would prevent that non-prioritized space from becoming a source to reseed invasive species into the other 4 compartments of the area. All right, the results. The results of all those calculations can be seen in this table. Those compartments in the natural area FQI category were given the highest priority score of 1. So those would be the ones that would, that would be the first ones to work on based on whatever your budget is. While those compartments in the low FQI category were placed at the end with a score of 999. The compartments in the high FQI category were placed in the middle, and they were then prioritized within that category by their summary scores. And that's all I have there. Brittney's got the next section for the results.
Yeah, so to continue talking about results of this study, we spent nearly 300 field hours at the site studying the flora of the trail, which ended up being approximately 10 hours per compartment. And we identified over 270 plant species, including 31 different trees and 243 herbaceous species. This included 18 exploitably vulnerable species, which was an exciting number to gain. Although we know that if we spent another 300 hours, we know that there'd be more plant species out there that we may not have seen during our time in the field, because unfortunately, there's never enough time out there. So we, as Robert just showed you that prioritized score, we then took that information to create those prioritized compartments for removal efforts. And this was just thinking like logistically how it would be possible to do this type of work. And then we also provided cost estimates for this management and restoration. And more detailed information about all of this can be found in the final report that we have. So of the total species, I mentioned that there were 31 tree species that we encountered. And American basswood was the most common, which was closely followed by sugar maple and white ash. Of the 243 herbaceous species that we saw, river grape was actually the most common in all of the compartments, closely followed by staghorn, sumac, and Virginia creeper. And then thinking about the invasives world, which obviously is very important to us, there were 34 invasive species that were detected, 14 of which are considered to be nominated tier species. So those are the ones that I showed you the tiered species list at the beginning. And Robert also mentioned that we had that heavier invasive score leaning towards those nominated tier species. The most common one that we encountered was common buckthorn, but then that was also closely followed by Oriental bittersweet and honeysuckle species. So talking about this prioritization, what we ended up resulting in was dividing the trail into 5 priority groups. And again, this was based on that prioritization score, and then also looking at how we could take that information on the native species and protect them with the most amount of effectiveness. And so we were able to then just break the trail up into 5 segments. And so again, the natural area fell into that center portion, or priority 1 of the trail. And then the secondary most was the westernmost portion towards Watertown. So, and then we kind of then divided priority 3 to both sides of that, priority 4 is the more eastern side towards Black River, and then priority 5 was all the way to the end of the trail in Black River there. We also then took the information that we had collected and we created compartment profiles for each of these compartments to include the invasive species, tiered species, or tree species and herbaceous species that we encountered out there. So I know, again, this is a ton of information, but please feel free to check out the study on our website. I'm sure Megan, I don't know if she has already, but she can post a link in the chat box to that study if you have not reviewed it yet. So that kind of leads me into the recommendations portion, and then we'll talk about a few different things. So one of the first recommendations that we recognized would be essential to any future efforts at this site would be to creating a Friends of the Black River Trail group of some sort. And so this would allow an increased number of volunteers to help reduce the cost of management and restoration, but then it would kind of grow that community of people who are already using the trail so frequently to help protect it and enhance stewardship in that community and at that site. This is seen across many different recreational areas across the nation, these friends groups, and they seem to be very effective. And also thinking about long-term monitoring and maintenance at the trail, the friends group would be able to assist with this, even potentially acquire funding to help protect the trail as well. And then we also recommended that some interpretive panels be posted at this site to help inform people of the flora and fauna. One of the highest ranked species that we found was the green dragon. And this was actually only found because anytime we found a herd path off the trail, we specifically really spent a lot of time on those herd paths, monitoring the species that were there. And this green dragon had actually been trampled over on part of the herd path. And so, trying to get more people to understand the importance of that riparian area and to stick to the main trail, just kind of working with people to do that and having those panels out there would be helpful. Next, you're going to hear from Robert about the manual mechanical methods and recommendations, and then we'll close out with the restoration at the site. So, Robert, back to you. Oh.
All right, I'm back. Oops, back that up one.
Yep, I got it, Robert. Do you see
You
the
got
screen?
it? All right, thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, one more slide and we'll be good.
Oh,
all right, excellent. This is the one. All right. Due to the large use of this trail, we're recommending that the use of chemical treatments be minimized or not used at all. And if they are used, that they're very much holding by the safety precautions that are out there. The recommended treatments that we included in our report are a combination of digging and hand pulls for most of the non-woody invasive plant species and the seedlings of the woody invasive species, like for the buckthorns and honeysuckles. Use of hand tools, such as an uprooter or a root talon for the invasive shrub removals. Use of the spade cut method, which involves cutting the stalk below the soil surface with the blade of a spade, and smothering there. And this is all for Phragmites. And smothering, which is involved which involves placing a thick black tarp over the Phragmites for a period of a few years. For Oriental bittersweet, we're recommending cut stem chemical treatment with secure covers placed over the treated surface. The last one with the Oriental bittersweet was the only recommendation that involved chemicals, since Oriental bittersweet has the extensive root system and it'll send new sprouts many feet away from the cuttings. So just simply cutting would not do the trick. And if you try to remove all of the roots, this would be really difficult and could disturb large areas of the compartment. The secure covers would be placed over the treated surface to prevent any contact with the chemical by the public. We're also recommending that the volunteers, a group is formed to monitor and manage the trail after this project is complete. This will keep the invasive species in check and ensure the trail does not return to pre-project conditions. All right, back to you, Brittney.
Thanks, Robert. So now that we talked a little bit about the management side of things, we wanted to talk about ecological restoration. But before we go into the recommendations for this specific site, we wanted to take this opportunity to really clarify our perspective on this, especially on ecological restoration and what that actually means from our perspective, from our work. So from a large scale perspective, ecological restoration is a tool that can be used to, when implemented effectively and sustainably, can be used to protect biodiversity, improve human health, large scale increase food and water security, support climate change mitigation, resilience, and adaptation. So it's a solutions-based approach that engages communities, scientists, policymakers, land managers, and everyone else that can work together to repair the ecological system at hand and rebuild it into a healthier system. So this is something that we really wanted to emphasize on, that the goal is to accelerate this recovery. And there's a lot of conditions that should be considered, including the existing species at the trail, sunlight, soil, water, erosion potential, soil compaction or contamination, and what kind of work that might entail as part of that as well. So because areas like the Black River Trail is a riparian corridor, it's a dynamic community of plants and animals, and also microorganisms that all interact together with their physical environment to create this ecosystem that they survive in and thrive in. And so by taking our study and using the information to recommend the removal or suppression of these invasive species, we'd be recommending that a disturbance would be occurring at this site. And so that also kind of creates this opportunity to restore this and help enhance the natural recovery that might happen while limiting or protecting it against reinfestations of invasive species. So this is something that, although we are looking at only a 75-acre space along the Black River Trail, the projects like this could have the potential in a larger system like the Black Watershed as a whole, the Great Lakes Basin, or even thinking even larger scale like the Algonquin to Adirondacks link. So although we are working in a small spatial area, we're also thinking the impacts that this ecological restoration work might have on other regions. And, thinking about tools in our toolbox, ecological restoration is just one part of this continuum of restorative activities. And so what you can see on the screen here is just a visual example of this, just a way for you to come together on the same mindset that there's a large range of activities and interventions that have to occur to really reach a fully native thriving ecosystem. So there's also this interconnection between all of these different steps and processes that should happen at the sites. And, it doesn't necessarily have to just be at a pristine rural area that's not impacted by urban or agriculture, because the Black River Trail that we studied, there is that urban component and there is that agricultural component with the recreation, societal impacts. When we were out there studying the trail, there were hundreds of people that we saw on a daily basis who used the trail and were very interested in what was happening. So this feasibility study that we released should be considered the first steps of restoration and used as a reference to measure change and track progress. Or if anyone on the line is hoping to replicate this, we're happy to share more information and, try to work with other people to really improve our monitoring, documentation, evaluation, and reporting of restoration work or other efforts that are happening across the region. And, just again, emphasizing that the actual seed spreading and the plantings are an exciting part of the work, but it's really just one component of many different strategies that have to be utilized together to really contribute to that biodiversity conservation, increasing that carbon sequestration, and providing other vital ecosystem services like improving the positive interactions of human and their connections to nature. So from this study specifically, with the over 200 native species that we encountered, including trees, shrubs, herbs, graminoids, we then took into some of those considerations, and really the biggest ones that we looked at was shade tolerance and the wetland indicators, and we found the most common species. So this is a list of some of the most common tree species that we encountered at the site. A list of the most common grass species that are native to the region as well that we encountered at this site. And then this is separated out into 3 categories. So our wettest areas, the upland areas, are the species that are considered potentially positive for any of the areas. And so there was a lot of information that we pulled out from this and recommended in that report, and hope to see some of these species recolonizing those areas or invasives were managed and removed. Robert.
Robert, if you're talking, you're on mute.
He's trying to unmute. I'm going to take my control back, Robert, just 1 second. If you want to wait with the mouse. There you go, Robert. You should be able to.
Yes, my
Yep.
my mute button disappeared, so I could not unmute myself. Thank you, Brittney. All right. Next steps. Much of the Black River Trail study area we found was owned by the Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation. So in the report, we've suggested that they take the lead for the invasive species management and restoration. But that doesn't mean SLELO PRISM's out of it. We could assist in this work in an advisory capacity, and also by organizing a volunteer group that would conduct the long-term monitoring and management of the trail. Projects of this size are, often hampered by budgetary constraints. The prioritization system that we created for this feasibility study allows the land manager the freedom to focus management in areas where it would make the most impact, while being able to stay within the available funds that they have on hand. The methods that we used to create the prioritization system can be used in many ecological communities. So it may be used by other organizations to evaluate the feasibility of management and restoration of their lands, whatever type they may be. And we also intend on using this tool for evaluating future projects, and we're currently working on modifying these methods to perform time-limited health assessments that we want to do on our priority conservation areas. One last note before I end is I'd like to, if you see here down at the bottom right, that is Cody and Doug. There were 2 summer technicians that helped us out in 2020 for several days. They were going around collecting data for the invasive species, and we were able to use them because Peter Zimmer from Parks was kind enough to lend them out for several days. So I'd like to thank Peter for that.
Yeah, thank you, Robert. And thank you everyone for joining us on the line today. Without collaboration with our partners and different organizations across our region, we wouldn't be able to create projects like this or studies like this and share this information as widely as possible. So if anyone has questions or comments or anything, Robert and I and Megan as well, or I'm sure any of the parks staff might also be on the line if anyone has questions.
Yes, feel free to come off mute if you want to talk directly, or I can pluck the couple questions that are in the chat box to get us started here. Tony Bean had inquired about how the glyphosate regulations in New York State, if that will hinder any of the suggestions from the feasibility studies regarding management, and if there was something other than glyphosate suggested for chemical use.
For the Oriental bittersweet, I assume. Robert, if you want, do you want to answer that one?
Oh, goodness. You know, it's like our contractors usually the ones that decide what the most sound chemicals are for it, and tricloper is what they've been using often now. But yeah, you know, with the new regulations in place, no glyphosate. So when we use chemicals for Oriental bittersweet, it won't be that.
There's also a question about the use of salt brine being useful for the control of some of the plant species there.
Yeah, I am not really familiar with the use of salt brine on it. It's something I would have to look into. I mean, anything that is not is a non-chemical treatment that could be used there safely, and we could keep the conditions on the ground suitable for the native species would be fair game, but I couldn't speak to that treatment because I'm not really familiar with it.
Hey, Megan, I can comment on the salt brine kind of quickly, if that's okay. I've been advised that we should only use chemicals that have been approved and have a registered label through New York State, which seems kind of counterintuitive. You think maybe salt brine is more environmentally sound, but if it doesn't have a label and specific directions to follow, then we've been advised to not use those type of treatments.
Yeah, that makes sense, Peter. Thanks for sharing that.
Yes, thanks.
Emily, just to answer your question, at this time, we, you know, Pete, if you want to speak up too, we have not, there has been no current plan to pursue funding at this time, but that's not saying that it's not going to happen ever.
Yeah, Emily, you know, the results of this feasibility study are kind of just rolling out. So we're all just kind of digesting it right now. So as this gets a little more developed and, you know, maybe we get more of a volunteer basis under our belts or something, we probably will pursue some sort of funding down the road. Yeah,
we're hoping that the first step would be to increase the community support in creating that volunteer group, just because there were people that, I mean, Robert and I were out at the trail from May through October at different times throughout the year. And I mean, there were hundreds of people that we spoke with directly who were so passionate about protecting the trail. So there's definitely that great potential. It's just, you know, a lot of hurdles always exist when doing anything.
Yeah.
And I see Steve Young actually, so that's a really good question. So creating a manual to replicate this work at other trails where people wish to evaluate the invasive program. And I think that's a really good idea. We are hoping to start utilizing this ourselves at more sites. So maybe that could be our first step, is to pull out the Black River Trail results specifically and just have the methodology for conducting a study like this. That's a great recommendation. Thank you.
No, it's a good idea. It's, you know, from all my years, previous years in the Army, it's like they would always have what they called like continuity guides. And so that new people could come on board and look through that material and know where to go from there. And so we could do the same thing as we're for our future projects, and that could be shared with other organizations so they could do the same exact work that we did.
Mhm. Yeah, does anyone else have any other questions? I don't really see anything else coming in the chat box. Or Megan, do you have any other questions or comments you want to add?
Yeah, sure. So just wanted to thank everybody for coming. I will be sending out a follow-up email to everybody who attended, so just be patient. We'll go ahead and include the report, the Black River Feasibility Study final report, this recording, and then other resources. And then I'm going to plop in the chat box our events page, because we have the second webinar in the SLELO Special Project webinar series coming up on March 18th, or I'm sorry, March 16th at 1 o'clock. So you can check that out along with other events that we have. We have guided walk and talks coming up next week and other opportunities for you to get involved in as well. So thank you for joining us today and have a good day.